Good morning. Welcome back to the second hour of LoveBabz, LoveTalk. I'm Babz Rawls-Ivy. I'm delighted this morning because these are people I actually really, really like. Hey, Connie Royster. Hey, Frank Mitchell. Unmute yourselves. Oh, I can unmute you.
Morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you?
We're good. I'm
Well,
good. I
You
shouldn't
both
speak
look
for Frank.
amazing.
Oh, thank you,
Yeah.
Babz. You too,
Nice
as
to see you,
always.
You guys look charming. So, all right. So tell me about this collaboration because I got the flyer, I got the notices, I got the information. I didn't even realize there was a window on Tony Hart Museum. I think I kind of vaguely knew in the back of my mind, but I didn't really know. So you all have started this chapter 1, telling our neighborhood stories. You're starting with the Constance Baker Motley exhibit opening at the Hart Museum at the Q House. So tell me about this collaboration and what's happening now. Connie Royster is Constance Baker Motley's niece.
Right.
And so you stay connected and you stay keeping her story in the forefront of our consciousness, particularly in New Haven, because she's from New Haven and she spent her youth at the Q House.
Right.
Well, we now know it's a Q House. So tell me about this Connie Frank collab.
Well, shall I start, Frank?
You should.
So, Babz, so yes, Judge Motley started her life here in New Haven, born and raised here, and her life actually would not have been Constance Baker Motley as we know her, but for the Q House. So there is this amazing circle that we're doing this exhibit at the Q House. And this exhibit really started, and this collaboration started with the talk I gave to the Yale African American Affinity Group. I don't even remember how many years ago, maybe 3. I think it was just as the pandemic started. And that led to this exhibit at the Yale Law School. And when we did that, that was last spring.
I went to that, yes.
Yes, right. And there was an open forum at that time in the spring, when just before it closed. At that time, we got together and said, this needs to have some kind of life of its own to tell her story of the first African-American federal judge who came from New Haven. Has much more to her life than just that, including her extraordinary career as a civil rights attorney for the Legal Defense Fund and many other things. How do we tell that story and use that as a kickoff to tell the story, other families' stories in the Dixwell neighborhood and greater New Haven and beyond? And the Community Foundation, specifically the Vineyard Project and the, what's it called, Frank? The
Fund for New Haven Black Futures, I believe.
Yeah, the Black Futures Fund picked up on that and agreed to do funding for what we now have. Frank, they hired Frank, the brilliant Frank Mitchell, to curate and make this happen. And Frank has been almost semi-resident at my house, putting this exhibit together. And I've known Frank forever, but I've just loved working on this project with him to tell the story, the first chapter.
Yeah,
Frank, so why did you say yes? Like, what was it about this, Frank, that attracted you? Because I mean, I know of your work. I know how amazing you are, and you could do all kinds of things. Why'd you say yes to this?
It's a great story. Constance Baker Motley is inimitable and so tightly linked to New Haven and to Connecticut. And it's sort of like the Amistad story. Plenty of people know the story, but more should. And so we're constantly in the process of reminding people and finding ways to connect who she was and all she did in her many facets to life in New Haven and in Connecticut, which is what she did when she was alive. it was also a great opportunity to keep reminding people about the many Dixwell stories, the many New Haven stories that we haven't documented yet, and prompting people to think about what do they have in their attics and garages and in their closets and in their hat boxes, Babz Rawls, that should be out so people can hear these stories and know who lives here, who lived here, get a sense of what life was like in the 70s and 80s and 60s and 50s. Those are periods we haven't documented well. We've got, good documentation for the early 20th century, but we don't have as great material for the times we actually all lived in. And so what we hope will happen because of this project is that more people will start thinking about what do they have in their house that they've held on to from their parents and grandparents that could help us to tell more of the stories of that part of the city, this part of the city. Connie's family has been amazing because her mother kept a lot of stuff. And because there have been Bakers and Roysters and Motleys living in and around New Haven, it was possible to hold on to these incredible bits and pieces of history so that somebody could have them. And Connie's lucky enough to have them. And thank God she's willing to share some of that with us. There are things that she's got in this family collection that don't exist in other places, other archives around the city of New Haven. So flyers from the 30s and 40s to promote grocery stores and dances and parties and community events that link New Haven to Waterbury and Bridgeport and Hartford, and sort of this documents sort of the connections between Black communities as they grew and emerged here in mid 20th century Connecticut, as folks are coming in and adding to the folks who are here and building these networks. And those things, they were printed on paper, which will fall apart after 30 years. And so it's just lucky that some of this stuff exists in Connie's archive. So we actually have the tangible evidence of people growing in these communities at that time. And, we've got the oral history about it, but to actually see it in person is really, really incredible because it's not at the public library or at the Institute library, or maybe at the state library in some old box, but these kinds of things are really precious and it's amazing to have them. So, and other people probably have things like that in their basements and they just need to go down there and start looking. So that was a really important reason to take this project on. And I think because it's Constance Baker Motley, it's a big enough name that it gets our attention. But everybody has things like this, and everybody could be contributing to telling this story in New Haven and how Black residents who had been here for generations and newer Black residents helped to shape and change that part of the city and this city generally. And we need to document those stories and keep telling those stories, particularly now as places are saying you can't tell these stories anymore. These things didn't happen. So having the exhibitions, having people talk about them in public, having them in documentaries and in these public places, refutes the idea that people just showed up or these things didn't happen. Because they did.
So, Connie, this is very personal. How do you feel about airing very personal objects and artifacts and letters and things and whatever have you? I mean, it's very personal. How do you feel about that? How does the family feel about this?
Well, I think that my mother and also my aunt Edna Carnegie was also a saver. And she actually, when she died, I gave her archive to the African American Cultural Center. So there's still pieces of that there. I don't think they would have saved this stuff if they didn't mean it to have relevance, both to the family and to history. You can see that the documentation about my aunt is extraordinary. I mean, clippings and pictures and photographs, they knew how significant her life was. And it is documented. There is a true narrative going on. And I actually think that, you know, in another life, my mother particularly might well have been, who knows, an historian, an archivist. You know, there's a kind of sense of calling when I look at some of these things that, you know, photographs were not just thrown in a box, they were in an album, and names people are identified, which is one of the you know, the banes of existence for archivists. You know, who are all these people, right? You give us a whole lot of photographs, but we don't know who anybody is. They are so clearly identified. And that's really important. And it's important to me, you know, as I look at these things, I can do a tracing myself. Oh, that's on, you know, on Emily, or that's on Sarah, or, you know, Aunt Marion. I can see these things. So yes, it's personal, but the stories are not just mine. They're stories of you know, of my family and my community and the place that I grew up. And while part of why I can't get to finish, and I don't know when I ever will, like decluttering, you know, as they say, is because I open, you know, an album, or I find a piece of paper and I am there for a while reading. And if I knew something about it, even reminiscing, it is deeply emotional, but it's emotional in a very I hate to say, I don't mean public, but in a sharing way. It's meant to be shared.
I love it. All right, so this kicks off Saturday from 1 to 4. And will there be some programming? And how long is the exhibit going to be up? And how can the community access it? And how long? And for how long? And
Questions. Yep, Saturday is the public opening, and it's an opening reception. There will be programming, not on Saturday, but we want to keep drawing people in and giving them reason to show up, so we can keep asking them to think about telling their own stories and giving them some of the tools to begin doing that research if they haven't done that before. So there will be programming throughout the run of the exhibition, and we're going to finalize that. So definitely stay tuned. And this is the first big installation in the space that's going to be able to use the space fully. We had a welcome exhibition up when the building opened, but because of COVID and massing restrictions and all the complications and sort of the needs of the communities that are the heaviest users, it wasn't as easy to get into the building. So we'll be figuring out what the right patterns are for visitor usage. So it may be Thursday nights and some other days during the week, and then on the weekends. But we'll definitely be tweeting that out and posting it on the Q House website and on social media, so people have a sense of when else they can come in. And we'll definitely be up for tours, but we'll be doing some programming because we really want people to come in, be inspired, and start looking around. And I'm looking at you, Babz, Rawls-Ivy. I know you got stuff in your closet that you could tell a big story with.
what?
And you got those hats in there to start with.
Oh, that sounds like an exhibit, right?
Right?
Reminds us of one of the photographs in the exhibit, Frank, of the ladies at the luncheon, and right, the hats. Oh my God, right?
So, Connie, you talked about when you'd come across something and you spend some time poring over it. Tell me a little bit more about what that experience is like, because it's one thing, and we all do this. We go looking for something, you stumble across a photograph or something's written on the back, or you come across somebody's obituary, or you come across somebody's something or other award or whatever, and it just takes you back to that moment, and you're like, oh my God, I had completely forgotten about that particular time. Talk to me about what this experience was like to go through these things that you probably haven't touched in a good while,
or ever, right?
Or ever. Wow.
Or ever. I was looking. I opened a book Frank hasn't even seen this. I opened a book just the other day, and in it was a photograph of this group of Black waiters, right? And at least 3 of them were identified. And the tall guy in the black was my uncle Moxie, right? Maxwell Baker. And George Cunningham, a cousin, and another cousin, I forget which of the Huggins, another Huggins. And they were dressed in their waiters' uniforms, starch white tops, bow ties, cummerbunds, and black pants. There had to have been, I think there were like, maybe 6 or 8 of them standing erect. This is and I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, first of all, I couldn't tell where it was, but it looked like it was in the South. And I know that these men, my cousins, traveled the circuit. They weren't just up here in Connecticut, which they were, because they worked at the country clubs in Orange and Woodbridge, et cetera, on the circuit. But they also did Florida in the winter, and they did the West Coast, and they were looking so proud. And I thought, that's a story. It's an amazing story, and how much I loved my Uncle Moxie, and how when I had to just sit there and when I was in junior high school in New Haven, and I was going to, bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, and he was a waiter at these clubs, he would bring out his buddies and point and say, "That's my niece. That's my niece." And so proud, that, he was always very proud of me. But the stories just keep coming back of, love and family and what it must have been like to be a Black waiter on the circuit of, back in the 40s and 50s and 60s. So yeah, it makes you stop and think. It makes you take in the history and how the history is also personal. That's just one example.
Yeah.
I love it. So Frank, I was at Dr. Jonathan Berryman's talk at the New Haven Museum the other night about the 60 degrees of separation of music in New Haven. And it got me, as I'm talking to y'all, I'm thinking about that. When you curate an exhibition, and the people so personal, like Connie, right? Like her, you live in the same town as her. Does this become more special? Is there a greater weight of responsibility to get this right? Like what is it like to know the person whose family you are curating their effects of?
It feels the same. Because you're always working on a good project. You're always working with an artist or somebody who you trust and believe in and want to do the best work with. So in this case, it's that same sort of relationship. It's someone that you know and trust and want to do the best work with. And what's great about these kind of projects is that you really can, it's a relationship and a conversation, and it's evolving and it can continue. And that's sort of a nice thing. And this space and the way the space is constructed and the ideas behind this project mean that, we can shift, we can change. People should stay tuned because we'll be able to adjust and adapt and see how visitors respond to things, and then update or correct or add more depending on what people need. And I think that's a great way of being able to work. And it's the kind of work you can do with someone who you have a connection to. if it's a more formal creative relationship with an artist that you don't connect with particularly regularly, it's harder to do that. But since we have another kind of connection, we can keep iterating this project and keep adapting it for the audiences and find ways to work with school groups or work with churches or work with libraries and anybody else who shows up and wants us to do something. And because we have another connection, we can make that happen. And I think that's what makes projects like this so exciting, because it's this chance to do something that feels kind of separate from what you do in a more formal space and with more formal contacts, where the end product is an exhibition and it's in this big fancy gallery and then it's done. Whereas this is something we want to bring to New Haven, and we'll continue to keep finding ways to share it, and we'll keep adjusting what we can do so it's in the right place before the right people, and we're having the right conversation using these objects to do that work. And that's kind of a rare opportunity. So it's nice that we have it.
I love it. So Connie,
talk
talk to
I
me.
want to
Go ahead.
add one thing,
Jump in.
Babz. Babz, can I just add one thing?
Yes,
to what he said?
absolutely.
I have found the working with Frank a singular opportunity. First of all, he's brilliant.
Well, he is.
Yeah. Yeah, don't shake your head. He's brilliant. And it has been a wonderful collaboration. You know, I mean, obviously he's the artist and the creative brain and power behind this. But I also think that I have deep respect for him, and I think he respects me. And I think, the stuff is mine. So, but we were able to say back and forth, what about this? Does this serve our goal? Or what about this letter or this object? And it was a great back and forth that I think has made this project so meaningful to me. So I really thank Frank for everything he's done.
Yeah, you as well. It is a collaboration. I think if people are concerned that things get to be too intimate, they never do, because we decide this is the part of the story that you want to tell. This is the part of the story that you want to hold back on. It should be personal, because history begins, it is personal, and how we were able to tell these bigger aggregate stories is because people are willing to share. This happened to my grandfather, this happened to my grandmother. And so, 15 people in this neighborhood had the same experience. Then it becomes history. It's not just one person's idiosyncratic moment. It's a bunch of folks had that experience. That's history. How do we make sense of it? So it needs to be personal, but it doesn't need to be too personal or too intimate. And you can find a way to reserve some things, like people do all the time, and share out what you want to share and negotiate those boundaries. And I think we've done that well. And this project will only work if we're able to do that with people.
So it says chapter 1. Are y'all a part of many more chapters, or like what does that mean, and what do we get to look forward to?
Yep, we're actively looking for chapter 2 right now. I know you got those hats in there. You got a big story. I'm going to be following up. So you should just either think about your excuses why you can't do it, or decide how you want to have your story told in the space. Because
I feel like I'm being directed here, Connie. I think I'm being. This is not an ask; it's a directive.
There are many stories to be told. And I think that Frank's right. I mean, this is the big, the beginning. It really is chapter 1, and the whole point was, I think initially, the thought was, oh, this is going to be all about Judge Motley, and the thing is, no, it's not all about Judge Motley. It's about the many, many stories that have to be told. This is a kickoff, an inspiration to that everybody has a story. It's not just famous people. She had 8 other, is that right? 8 other brothers and sisters, and and they each had a story, right? And some of them are in this exhibit, and some of them aren't. And it really was encouragement to everybody else in the community, as Frank said, you know, to go in the attic and to go in the, you know, in the garage. But also for right now, as you're cleaning up or, you know, moving and downsizing, don't throw stuff out and save what you have right now. Think about the present for your grand and, you know, the people to follow.
Mm. So was there anything uniquely surprising that either one of you found out about during this pulling together, curating this exhibit that you didn't know before?
I'd say she's pretty well documented. And there's a recent biography in the past 6 months, maybe.
Yeah,
6
1 year
months,
ago, exactly.
year. So a lot of that has been covered. One of the things that I really liked about looking at the material that Connie has is it really is much more family material. So there's a Bible, an embossed Bible to her. There's an amazing early edition of the Ebony Date with a Dish cookbook. So all these things that feel like they were part of her daily life that didn't show up as much in the press, although she really was well covered in the press. Ebony magazine loved her. Jet magazine loved her. I mean, she was pretty unique. There wasn't anybody else like her. She was sui generis in that regard. So she got good coverage, and people found a way to kind of put her into a bunch of different categories, pop cultural categories. So following her New York career when she's a borough president and going to lots of big glamorous events at New York hotels and sort of being photographed and showing up in Jerry Major society, but also filing legal briefs and judicial articles, living in those worlds that would make her kind of a rock star for a national Black public, but also taking seriously her responsibility to be a judge and to be seen as credible amongst her peers, and sort of how she negotiated that. And you sort of know that, but it's nice to see evidence of it in her daily life and her artifacts.
Mm.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the other things Frank's mentioning is that all those magazines, all those Jets, all those Ebonies, they've all been saved. I mean, I have them. I mean, you know, and you know, and flipping through those, and you know, my mother would put a little something to mark the spot, and you know, that's pretty incredible that there's like an archive of Jets and Ebonies of you know, when you see those, I mean, some people do still have them, but mostly they don't exist anymore. The real deal, the real thing.
I threw mine away. I hate it, but I did.
See?
Oh,
Yeah.
I've thrown some away.
Yeah. So it's really historic to be able to feel and touch the original documents and to see articles, and not just on her. I mean, they are themselves a history of, you know, our people.
Yeah.
And you know, she might not have been on the cover, but somebody important was on the cover, or somebody culturally significant was on the cover, and she was inside. So it was really interesting just to even go through those.
Yeah.
Mm.
Incredibly poignant, because those things don't exist in print anymore. So there's no more Jet. You know, Black Enterprise doesn't exist as something you can hold in your hand. Ebony doesn't either. And so, which was unimaginable even, and you know, I did some work with Mrs. Carnegie and Mr. Saunders and those folks rooting around in the collections of Cass, and I was always thinking, why are they keeping this stuff? Who needs all this? It's online, you know, it's microfilm. There's always going to be more. In fact, there was not always going to be more. So
Right.
Wow. That's pretty that's pretty profound.
Right. It's true.
I mean, they are online. I will say Ebony does kick up dust on Instagram.
Yeah, no, I get it.
social
I
media.
see it online, and I like it online, but there is something quite fabulous about having it in your hand.
Yeah.
I mean, and for me, holding an ebony and jet, I could tell you, we had them on our coffee tables at my
Of
house when I was
course.
growing up, but they were at the salons,
Yes.
right? So sometimes churches would have them in the hallway
Yes.
on the foyer thing.
Yeah.
So
Well,
so it was a part of, I mean, everywhere we went, it was that Black excellence, Black glamour was
Right.
so much a part
in
of
the
it.
daily life, they photographed everyday life, and so there was that record of people jumping double dutch in their neighborhoods.
Yeah.
It wasn't just bad stuff. It was everyday people. This random person who was a farmer in Eastern Ohio, that they would get a story, and sort of the effort to sell subscriptions through churches. So building the community, building the network of folks so that you're reinforcing that sense of this is who we are, and we want you to know this in our churches and in our legal offices and in the doctor's office, and
Right.
going into those spaces and seeing this affirmation of, okay, yeah, we're part of that, as opposed to, I don't know what you see now when you go to the doctor's office, but yeah, it's not that thing for sure. And the ancillary stuff that they did, the fashion stuff, or the
fashion
makeup
flair.
stuff, and all those things where people showed up together to celebrate who they were, and sort of,
Yes.
which, it's like sometimes
These
there's
are
concerts,
important.
if you don't have that, the same prompt doesn't exist in the same way anymore. And that's
Mm.
it's
Well,
a
the
lot.
exhibit, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm good.
The exhibit is telling our neighborhood stories, chapter 1, Constance Baker Motley exhibit. And it is opening Saturday, March 4th, from 1 to 4. You can go and see all these things. And I take it you two will be on hand to greet people and to talk a little
Definitely.
bit about what we're looking at and what we're seeing.
Definitely.
Yep.
Yes, definitely. I'll be there.
Okay.
And I look forward to seeing many folks, relatives, friends, new friends, making new friends, and encouraging people to, do what we just did, Frank and I.
Yeah, reminisce.
Well, thank y'all for being with me this morning. I enjoyed this. I'm glad I had opportunity to talk to y'all about this before the exhibit, before I step in to see the exhibit on Saturday afternoon. So I
Always a
appreciate
pleasure.
y'all.
Always,
It's always a pleasure to see you, Connie.
Yes, Babz.
Lovely to
Thank
see you,
you.
Frank Mitchell. I'll see y'all
Yeah.
soon. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for this
Thank you.
opportunity to talk with y'all about this wonderful exhibit.
Thank you.
I'll see y'all. Have a good weekend.
You too. We'll be busy, but yes.
All right, Harry, it's our weekend. We are on our way out. Y'all be safe out there. The weather is going to be challenging tonight and tomorrow. So y'all be safe. And I will talk to y'all on Monday. And I'll catch y'all at the Q House on Saturday. Hi, this is Babz Rawls-Ivy from New Haven, Connecticut. And you're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, streaming live at newhavenindependent.org.